have some issues with deliverance as the only means of healing. It isn't biblical, first of all. And secondly, it's precipitated fear and shame in a good many people I love. If we're going to be a healthy church, we're going to have to sift this logic. So let's get started.
Welcome to the Sifted Wheat Podcast with Leslie Lamb, a counselor by profession, a minister of truth, and a lover of people. This is a safe place where she sets a path for others to learn how to move through hard seasons with confidence and grace, encouraging your faith, empowering your choices, and challenging your perceptions through the Word, the wisdom from years of counseling others, and her own experience of being sifted. Here's Leslie.
There are a couple of things that we get wrong in our theology, and please know that I use that word wrong lightly. Maybe I should say I don't think we get right, because again, I'm not an expert, just well-versed in humanity and personal beliefs that can be limiting. One thing is that we can tend to line up in one camp or another, spiritual or physical. Jesus clearly walked both worlds and clearly encouraged others to see that they could too. He knew that there was a perception that others had about him that weren't in line with truth and were resistant to his nature, and he pointed it out. There's one space I find this particularly intriguing, his encounter with the demoniac. I've gone back to this story time and time again for two reasons. One, it exemplifies the influence of demons over people, and two, it brings it back to the person to bring healing, but not in the ways that you would initially think. Let me explain. The first look we get into this story is a physical world outlook. A whole town is afraid because of the torment of one man. Only this man is not an aggressor. He too is being tormented by an unseen force, the demonic. Jesus is aware of this, and when the person, runs to him for help, Jesus encounters him with love, sees his point of need, and begins to cast out what and who oppresses him. The demons freak out. "Don't destroy us," they plead. They see beyond Jesus, the man, to the spiritual power and authority that he actually is. And in a move that I have to admit I don't fully understand, Jesus answers their request and sends them into a herd of pigs who then jump off a cliff. Then we shift back out of the spiritual and into the physical world of first the people who are still fearful and now fearful of Jesus, and the personhood of the man, now fully clothed and sitting around with the disciples watching the rest of the story play out. Now, I don't know if the herders knew exactly what happened because they only had physical sight, and we're told that they were a good ways off from where Jesus encountered the man. But they seemed pretty freaked out that their pigs unalived themselves, thus taking their livelihood into the depths of the sea. But instead of being moved by the power of God and the redemption of the life of a neighbor, they decide that they would rather Jesus leave them alone than to do anything for them. This sounds a lot like the roaring lion still tormenting the community with fear to me, pointing out that demonic or spiritual influence doesn't always look like something crazy, but can be the proliferation and introduction of thoughts and beliefs that limit our experience with God and others. But something happens that if we aren't careful, we will miss. And do miss. And I think that this is maybe where mental health and demonic deliverance get mixed up. When Jesus encounters the man, the first thing he does is ask his name. That, I believe, is Jesus reaching past the demons into the soul of man. The demons are loud and demanding, and Jesus is telling them to get out. But this moment, despite what the loudest voice in the room is saying, I don't believe Jesus wants to know their names. He's God. He sees in the spirit, so he would already know who he is dealing with. I suppose it can be for the sake of the hearer, in this case, the disciples who are looking on, but in this moment, I believe he's encountering the soul of the man, to remember himself, his identity, and call him back into the light. He's calling to the man who is being silenced while demons are crying out of him. But the one who needs help and healing and is weary of torment and struggle, that is who Jesus is reaching into. As a counselor, I have to walk these two worlds consistently. With each client and with their permission, I encounter the spiritual part of healing, which more often looks like letting Jesus in rather than casting demons out. And the physical part, investigating the source of fears and insecurities in order to gain understanding to shift from limiting beliefs that restrict health and growth. See, as I read that story, I see that deliverance came to the man who encountered Jesus, but oppression and fear still resided with the town that sent him away. So though the demons were cast out, the people invited them back in by choosing fear over faith. But, and this is the goodness of God, y'all, Jesus doesn't abandon the town for good. He tells the man, now healed and in his right mind, go back to your family and tell them what I've done. And he does. You see, Jesus doesn't just cast out the spirits. He replaces them with support and community to remain gone. In fact, the next time he returns to the Decapolis, we're told Jesus was met by a crowd of many people who followed and believed in him. How? The demoniac became a missionary, telling the good news of Jesus not just with words, but with sight. Those who knew him best, his family, could see the change, and that word spreads, my friend. Jesus' plan was to deal with the demons, not just those tormenting the man, but those who had crippled the town. But there's another story that tells of mental health in Jesus' encounter. Upon first reading, we might not see it, but understanding the culture and the language, it starts to present itself. And that is the story of the woman at the well. Jesus goes off the beaten path to meet with a woman who has lived by necessity or insecurity, a life of isolation. Jesus didn't just see a woman at a well. He saw a dejected, isolated, rejected, and depressed woman needing water. She was struggling with her mental and emotional health. You won't read those adjectives in the Bible, but if you place the cultural context of the day into our cultural understanding, you will see that that was entirely possible. I've met with many a woman with multiple marriages and divorces in their lives, and sometimes just multiple sexual partners or serial relationships. And even in our advanced culture, they carry the weight of shame and rejection and isolation. Their identity holding on by a thread, usually attached to a web of lies. Does Jesus cast out demons? Does he tell her to go to the mountain altar and worship and pray and be cleansed and then come back? Does he tell her to just get over herself and go back home and submit to the man she lives with? No. He diagnoses her condition and her circumstance, and she eventually gets that he sees her and accepts her and loves her. That revelation, again, not just impacts her heart. We don't know about her life, but I would venture to guess that her circumstances did not change, but reminds her of her true identity. And this emboldens her to leave her water jar and run to the people she was just an hour before afraid of. Because the beauty of healing is we might come empty, but we leave full. It's so important that we read these stories descriptively and not prescriptively. We can see what Jesus did here, but we must read all accounts of healing to see that not every encounter involved a demon. There were many times when it required a touch, a word, a mixture of mud and spit, and countless other encounters that we aren't given specifics for. Jesus shows us that there are sick people and lame people and hurting people and blind people, and his response is not to pray deliverance over them. He simply heals the issue that is encumbering them. He doesn't make a scene or get loud and proud, but rather speaks a word or a promise, and his will is done. He doesn't chastise or shame or rebuke the person, but he sees the person and calls them out of that thing that seeks to claim their identity, to bring them healing and hope. Once I was meeting with a young woman who had been quite literally beat down by the church, trying to call out demons and, quote unquote, deliver her. It was traumatizing. As I met with her and loved her, it became clear that she was struggling against a spirit of death. And I don't say that lightly, because not a day went by when she didn't consider death and what she would do and should do to exit the world. My heart broke for her. We had done all the therapeutic interventions to help, and still the torment of death beckoned her. I prayed and asked the Lord what he would have me do, and he said, "It's time." To be honest, I was petrified, but I knew it was going to take him and him alone. I knew also that I didn't have to become big and demanding and loud. If I was a child of God, indwelled by his spirit, I could stand as a representative of Christ and simply say, "Get out." And the spirit would have to go. I told her this. I told her I trusted God to meet us with quiet strength and spiritual power. And he did. It was the sweetest moment. I spoke. I commanded quietly, but with full spiritual authority, and I saw this sweet young woman relax and receive. She stopped thinking about death all the time. She started experiencing joy in life, in nature, in people. But I'm always going to be honest. She has to remain intentional about staying around those who encourage her and remind her of truth. She has to renew her mind and daily seek the Lord in ways that feel safe to her. Her health requires other support and ongoing intervention, but she has hope, and she hears from God. And she might not be able to read the Bible or sit through corporate prayer without fear creeping in, but she sits with the Lord, and God loves her and chooses her and is delighted each day that she chooses life. That is healing, friends. Don't discount that. Jesus shows us that there is a time to deal with demons briefly, but the work of healing the soul takes time and requires community. We can be disappointed when healing isn't instantaneous, when things don't get profoundly better immediately. But don't despise the process, or you'll abandon the miracle. Jesus tells us that an incomplete process can open the way to even more torment and corruption. If we simply clean the house and don't intentionally replace what was removed with his presence and his truth and his word and relationships with others to hold us accountable and support us, we will fall prey to oppression again. We will seek to fill the empty spaces, and if we don't do that with his spirit, lesser things will hijack our allegiance. The physical work, rewiring faulty messages and staying in community and developing new patterns, must be coupled with the spiritual work of prayer and intercession. And that brings forth transformation that doesn't just affect one soul, but has the power to free all those who come close to listen. Jesus made missionaries out of those that others had dismissed. He does the same today. And those testimonies are the ones that inspire us to get to know Jesus ourselves.